political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, is killed in attacks by Israel. Supreme Court reserves its verdict on the retrospective application of the judgment upholding the rights of state governments to tax mineral output. Union government along with Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan argue against retrospective application. Jharkhand claims poorer states cannot forego revenue.
It'll be 10 out of 10. They're not all coming to India, but they're interested.
They're interested. You know, and one of the other things that's changed, Vishal, since you were talking about anecdotes, and I was just looking at this, the large private equity firms, we've seen the India heads being elevated to global positions and to lead Asia Pacific for Warburg Pincus, for KKR, and for Blackstone as well. So India, the lucky charm?
I would say so. I would take no credit for it. It's all India, trust me.
But, you know, let's, before I get to Rajiv, you know, since 1996, which is when Warburg made its first investment into India, what would you classify as the big changes that are really propelling the story forward? And specifically from a startup ecosystem point of view, what have been the big changes that you've noticed and what excites you today?
My gosh, it's just such a massive change. From 30 years ago, you were actually explaining to people what private equity was about. I mean, I remember a conversation that someone at Warburg had with an entrepreneur where he spent 1 hour talking about the great things private equity can do, the value you can add, and at the end he said, that's great. I'd love to do this, but do I have to give you any shares in my company? And that's just changed. Entrepreneurs are now, there's an entire new generation, and it's why shouldn't we take venture capital or private equity or venture debt, not why should we? And that's a massive change.
It is a massive change. Rajiv, Memani, let's build on that change and let's talk about what you believe will be the factors or the triggers to accelerate the kind of change that we are speaking of. You know, the topic that we are discussing now is the global aspiration, and there is potential, there is significant headroom for growth when we talk about that, because if we were really to talk about the India startup story going global, it really boils down to Indian SaaS going global. But if I were to ask you for your thesis on what next, what would that be?
Yeah. Thanks, Shireen. Thanks, Ishpreet, for inviting. You know, if you actually follow the startup story, a lot of the very prominent startups actually went global pretty early. And most of them have sort of come back.
Yeah.
They've had to, you know, write off or whatever else it is. Some of them are still there because they made acquisitions, and some of them are actually doing quite well. You know, most of the startups which are looking at going global, as you rightly said, Shireen, are either those which are in the services space, because that's India's competitive advantage. Value creation in India through leading edge technology and innovation, the kind that you see in the West Coast, has still not happened. India's startup ecosystem, India's entrepreneurs are right now maximizing the opportunity that is there in India. Scaling up at massive space, leveraging on technology that is there, looking at gaps in the market. So my personal view is, even if I look at corporate India at a larger scale, their right now aspiration is not to go global as much. People are taking early steps because for going global, we under-index on the management bandwidth that's required.
Yeah.
So I think, and also the opportunity that most of the startups who've got their operating model and design right, the opportunity that they're experiencing in India is quite phenomenal. So I think right now I see a lot of them actually capturing the momentum, getting the design right, looking at profitability, trying to maximize the opportunity in India, trying to look at consolidation in India. The next step would be to go to similar markets, is what I'm now seeing, you know, ASEAN, other emerging markets, Middle East, parts of Africa, which have sort of similar dynamics. Services sector tends to go much more on the Western side, and the consumer goods, you know, and those sectors are probably going much more sort of global south. So I would say that probably would be the next step, but right now the opportunity in India is also so immense with the way the economy is growing, and the way, the startups are now penetrating to tier 2, tier 3 cities.
Yeah.
I think right now, the way it appears to me, they are maximizing there, and they're also looking, for those who are successful, they're looking at lateral opportunities in this space.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of factors playing, as you pointed out, Rajiv, and you were right in talking about the fact that we saw many actually take those first bets of going global. Companies like Zomato, companies like Ola decided to go global and have now decided to exit their global operations and focus on the domestic markets, largely driven by bandwidth issues, driven by the need to be profitable as well. But, I just want you to also put into context for us, and perhaps Vishal, Udai and Ishpreet can comment on that as well. While we're talking about new age entrepreneurs, let's also focus on the story that's playing out from a sourcing point of view, from a Make in India for exports perspective. I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers that Walmart and Amazon have reported. Walmart, with a target of exporting from India $10 billion by 2027. They've crossed the 30 billion mark in the last 2 decades. Amazon has done about 8 billion in exports from India, but this is largely from the MSME sector. So how is that likely to play into some of the factors that we just spoke of? And, what is a new gen entrepreneur anyway? I mean, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, aren't they?
Yeah, I think Shireen, you're absolutely right. It's a massive opportunity. But classically, if I looked at what the new age entrepreneur was, I think the leaning was much more towards services, technology, consumer, where you could massively leverage technology for getting a competitive advantage. I think that's how we define the startup ecosystem. But I think some of them, Zetwork, Off Business, Moglix, I think some of them are trying to capture this opportunity. Maybe there are others, I don't know all the names. But I think it's a massive opportunity. And what happens is when you have, the biggest is Apple, iPhone. When you have iPhone, when you have the likes of Amazon, I mean, if you look at e-commerce exports from India, they're about $30 billion. China still does $330 billion of e-commerce exports. Likewise, if you look at Walmart, I think they were looking at, they had a conference a few months back, and their numbers are quite aspirational in terms of what they're looking at, in terms of procurement from India. So these are massive opportunities. Lots of entrepreneurs are getting into it. And I think where actually some of these companies are struggling, where Walmart, Amazon, and others are struggling, is they're not seeing scale players. So for the startups, I think there's a tremendous, because the competency of the startup is the pace at which they scale up. I mean, that's what amazes everyone. And I think that's a massive opportunity today, because if someone wants to, as simple as this, if I want to manufacture toys from India, which are the 2 large players? If I want to do garment exports, Shahi Exports is the largest one, Gokuldas is there. But after that, if I have to do $1 billion from India, are there 2 vendors that I can look at?
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity. I think it's a tremendous opportunity, and I hope some of these startup opportunities.
No, you're absolutely right. That is the challenge, but it's also the opportunity. But Udai, let's talk about the opportunities. Yesterday the Prime Minister, while addressing the Confederation of Indian Industry, and Rajiv was there with me, spoke about this being the golden opportunity for India, and how the private sector really needs to come to the table and look at the many opportunities that we should focus on. As someone who's looking at potentially the ability to scale, the ability to take from India and go global, what excites you? Where would you put your money today?
Yeah, no, thanks for this opportunity. Look, I think the opportunity is both on the services side and the manufacturing side. So let me touch on the manufacturing side for a minute. Rajiv talked about scale, and that's really important, but government initiatives like the PLI have just been absolutely transformational. So in fact, they have been one of the tenets of the investment thesis that we have followed when we are looking at the lower middle market company space. So one of the key trends has been really the localization of the raw material supply chain, right? And the more we can have a policy framework to go to integrate backwards, that makes us much, much more competitive. So let me give you an example. So we invested in a company which is the original design manufacturer for air conditioners. So for air conditioners, we were significantly dependent on China, 80% dependence on China. And the way things are going now, within 2 or 3 years, I think we will have 100% sort of self-reliance, right? So as an investor, that was hugely attractive, and our role is to not just provide funding, but to be able to kind of act as a facilitator, to be able to help these companies not just become national champions, but regional champions or global champions. So I see manufacturing as a big sort of opportunity. On the services side, again, you know, we've talked about IT services, we've talked about BPOs and so on. But the one industry where I feel that we've been sort of defensive about is on the creative side, right? So people think that, you know, Indians can be the office of the world, we can do mechanical jobs, we can be coders, and we can speak English. But India is much beyond that, right? So again, to give you an example, we've got a company that does visual effects for all the Hollywood studios in the world. And, you know, these guys get $100 million contracts just for visual effects. So you can imagine a movie like Gravity was made, the 2D to 3D conversion was done in Goregaon and in Chandigarh. So that is what the new India is, and that's where the new opportunity is.
Well, you know, yes, you're absolutely right in pointing out that there are some of these sectors that are often under the radar or fly under the radar, where we are seeing immense amount of movement and traction take place. But, you know, since you talked about the new opportunities for new India, and in the context of the PLI scheme, I think the government's decision to look at import substitution across a whole bunch of sectors, 14 sectors in specific that the PLI hopes to address, at some point, though, do you believe that if we want to integrate with the global supply chain and we want to be part of global trade, that, you know, these are things that we will need to dial back down on?
No, absolutely. Look, countries like China had a head start, right? We are late, right? And when people like Rajan talk about the fact that we should be focusing more on innovation and less on manufacturing, I think he has a point. But I think we have to do both.
Yeah, we need to do both.
And there is got to be a gestation period until we become competitive from a cost perspective, from a technology perspective, innovation perspective. There has to be that hand-holding by the government, and the private capital has to play a very important role in that. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, either we kind of grow up and are ready to compete with the world, or we just rely on other people to be the manufacturing sort of hubs of the world.
You know, that was the message that the Commerce Minister sent out to industry yesterday, a very loud and clear message to industry saying, look, you need to grow up, and you cannot expect the government to continue to provide protectionist measures. Indian industry needs to be competitive. But Ishpreet, let's talk about, you know, venture debt and the opportunities there. The headroom for growth is significant. 2023, finally crossing the $1 billion mark. What does the future hold?
Yeah, thank you, Shireen, first of all, for being here. CNBC and we carry a very special relationship. I remember the first fund of ours went on air in 2019, which was a $50 million fund. And we've come a long way. So it's been a special relationships. And Vishal, thanks for doing this. Warburg we have a lot of portfolio companies in common, and we've worked on a very consolidated manner. And Rajiv has been our partner throughout. Look, before I come to venture debt, I think there's few points were made by Rajiv. He mentioned few companies that work off business, which has been quite early companies of ours. I think overall, the way we started Stride, the whole positioning was about solving for credit gap. We keep on speaking about small business having credit gap, and the figure keeps on getting enormous every year with the GDP expansion. But very few people actually try to customize products in an agile manner to understand what the business wants. So what Zetwork and Off Business did, which was one of our earlier companies, is to customize those product offering, right, in terms of understanding what the small businesses want, what the mid businesses want, and what startups want. So venture debt happened for, we have actually a graph. In 2019, we projected venture debt from 120 billion to cross $1 billion. And we did our first report on that, and it crossed $1 billion. So we were very happy that the opportunity is only rising. And the pure fact about that is the credit gap is immense. It is only getting, we have actually done 13,000 crores as Stride Group now in the past 5 years, only enabling credit across Stride Ventures, Stride One, which is the other franchise of ours. And the only aspect that which has helped us penetrate is to understand the businesses. We have not gone with the product of saying, okay, this is our product, which traditionally financial institutions where we come from has. There's a standard product which you go and take it to the market, and that's what you try to give to small businesses. We have tried customizing products in terms of understanding, okay, if you're a consumer company, you have a 90-day working capital cycle. If you're a climate tech company, you have a capital expenditure requirement, which is much different than a consumer company, and then make an offering around that. And that gap, if you try to solve by use cases, is tremendous. And the credit is much more better because you're understanding and deeply involved with the business. So opportunity-wise, venture debt is definitely getting expansive. We are going global because the expansion we see on cards for venture debt being very, very important. But overall credit gap, I think there's a massive opportunity to solve for.
No, there is a massive opportunity, and it gives me a sense of deja vu because I can't remember how many panels I do every week where we talk about the credit gap and the very different ways that different players are trying to address that. But, what has been the experience for you, Ishpreet? What do you believe is the big pain point? What causes most friction? And do you believe that there is requirement on the regulatory side? I'll give you an example. For instance, the former State Bank of India Chairman Rajneesh Kumar said that we need to have a different rule book. The regulators need to have a different rule book when it comes to fintechs if we really want to bridge this credit gap. Your thoughts on that?
So actually, Jaspan made a very relevant point in the previous session. He said one of the opportunities in fintech is cross-border. Now, if you want to build export, since you mentioned about export of services and goods, we have to again understand, do these small businesses have the capability to even understand the financing of exports? Right? So you can build as many capabilities as a bank, but you have to understand the businesses grounds up. You have to go and meet them, understand, as I said, their value chains, what is the inherent business values like, where you want to solve for. Cross-border is huge, right? And if you want to really propel the exports, those kind of fitments has to be provided across levels. Manufacturing can only get picked up if at domestic level you understand what is the raw material, where it's coming from, what is the value addition which factories do, and then enabling export credit. You would not believe, Shireen, we at Stride One did a survey. We went to 1,000 small businesses and asked them what is packing credit. Almost 95% of the business do not know what is packing credit. How would you export? If you do not know that there's a packing credit limit available by banks, by financial institutions, the export would not get propelled. They go to their domestic banks for regular credit lines against mortgage of houses. This is not business finance. This is secured financing, right? So you have to understand, as I said, I'll go back to the rule book of ensuring that you understand business grounds up, create product, and then the value disruption happens.
I want to pick up on one of the themes that emerged from this panel, and that is the manufacturing opportunity. And Vishal, I'll talk to you in the context of what we are seeing happen in the region, not just in India specifically. This supply chain diversification that's taking place, this anywhere but China theory has been put aside very clearly at this point in time. It is now anyone and China, which is being talked about, and India, of course, figures in that list. As we look at this China Plus One strategy, I think it would be complacent to assume that we're the only game in town, because if we take a look at the numbers for Vietnam, for Thailand, I was just taking a look at the latest numbers. Thailand has seen FDI up 43% year on year, Vietnam up 32% year on year. So we are seeing other regions also emerge in the quest to try and drive in the benefits of this supply chain de-risking. Where do you believe India stands in this place? And if I were to ask you about your programmatic thesis on India today, what would it be?
So, look, I think you said it better than I could. There's options for investors. There's options for customers all over the world. As Udai said, we're late to the party. China's built its capability over decades. Manufacturing know-how, process know-how, cost benefits. We have to catch up. We can catch up. But there are options. It's not just other countries, by the way. The most crowded port in the world today, one of the most crowded ports, is Mexico, Gulf of Mexico. All the Chinese companies are shifting equipment and building plants in Mexico. They've clogged up the port with the ships. So China may not be selling out of China, but they'll be manufacturing somewhere else and supplying the world. So we need to be ahead of the game, and we need to keep doing that. Programmatically, there are two things we're looking at. One is manufacture in India for India to start with. Again, I think the point was made. Lots of examples I can give you. And going from there, pick the products, pick the spots where you don't need government support, where you can on your own go out there and win, and where there's high amount of engineering required, short-run manufacturing, skilled labor. India actually does really well in those. So let's pick those, build those out, and win.
You know, I want to pick up on both those, and let's talk about the India for India theme, and I want to get the panel to comment on that. And I think, you know, while we have seen a significant growth, especially on the upper end of the market, in the luxury goods market specifically, as far as Indian consumers are concerned, the growth and the strength of the Indian consumption story is still driven largely by about 300 million people. And the expectation is that that number will change significantly once we go from this 2,500 per capita to 5,000 per capita. What's your bet?
So, look, I think one, that's the bet. But again, I like to just give an example, bring it a little bit more to light. Many of you in the audience have hopefully heard of a company called Boat. Okay?
Yes.
New age entrepreneur, but they've been around for a while. 3 years ago when we invested in Boat, 100% of the product was imported from China. Today, close to 90% of it will be made in India. So what you're buying, what you're using out here is made in India. Next step, international expansion. Rajiv talked about it. This doesn't mean go conquer the US.
Yeah.
Start with ASEAN, start with the Middle East. We've got Indian consumers all over. The brand is known. It's just an example of investing, and slowly, it will take time, but build it out in India and win.
That's the India for India theme to start with, and I'll get Rajiv to comment on that as well. But I also want to talk about the India for the world. Outside of the SaaS story, outside of the IT services story, the GCC story, what is the India for the world thesis that you're betting on?
Here's another company, local, Faridabad based, called Imperial Auto. They make fluid transmission products for auto. Leading market position in India, started as India for India. We invested in this company a few years ago with Rajiv's help. And today they're selling all over the world. Highly engineered products, lots of part numbers, complicated, high labor content, skilled labor. They're going to win. And this is the type of company when they can actually go out there, build a sales force, figure out a go-to-market, because it is different in different markets.
Yeah.
And that's where someone like a Warburg or other private equity, venture capital should be able to help. It's not just capital. Help them get those markets. So I think Imperial Auto is a perfect example to continue coming into India. The appetite's there. It's the ground-up opportunity that we need to go out and find.